victim was over here on this curb line.
You think about this guy who would put his life on the line for our country, and then to be killed like that, you know, it's a gut punch.
The guy that talked to you that tried to get his bike back got shot in your front yard. Let's quit with the bull.
This ain't my damn first murder case, man.
We're dealing with a whole family of dangerous individuals.
You don't want me to stop her?
She's gonna run. She's smashing into a car.
Everything about William can be transposed to his family.
He was curated from the cradle to be a criminal.
The defense portrayed William as a child that was taking the rap for his parents.
And said that this was an unlawful attack upon the family.
If we lost a stand your ground hearing, this case was over.
For those most affected by a homicide, the first 48 is just the beginning. This is the story of the fight for justice in the weeks, months.
We need a police officer. One man's been shot. He's been shot in the chest.
The person who did the shooting, where is he right now?
We don't know where he is. He took off in a car. Lord, honey, breathe slow.
All we know right now is that there's a shooting and the victim's fighting for his life. My name's Matt Frazier, and I was the lead investigator for this case. Detective Bauman's with him at the hospital to check on his status. We don't know if he's going to pull through.
Okay, well, the victim was over here on this curb line.
33-year-old Craig Wingard served in the Marine Corps. He's an avid BMX rider and once owned a bike shop. He has a 9-year-old son.
The fact that our victim is a veteran affects me personally because I have 2 kids that served overseas. My name is Dave Walker, and I was the supervisor of the homicide unit.
We try not to get emotionally involved. It's impossible. It's impossible. You do, right? You're a human being. Craig, being a former Marine, definitely drove the team to find the suspect as quick as possible.
Apparently, our suspect goes in the house. He comes out and starts shooting.
Craig was shot 4 times in his chest, hand, and legs.
Seriously?
He freaking walks out in broad daylight and
Starts popping rounds. Daylight shootings on Sunday mornings are not common, but because it is 10 o'clock, there should be lots of witnesses out and about.
A neighbor says the shooter fled in a dark SUV with a paper license plate.
Apparently, our victim will drive up with her.
All right, Nicole, have a seat in front. We wanted to get her back to Detective Division as soon as we could to start gathering the facts and figuring out what happened. All right, Nicole. What happened leading up to all this?
My buddy Craig came to my house a day ago and said that this girl, Sarah, took his bike, a backpack, $500, his bank card from the hotel room.
Nicole says the night before Craig was shot, he checked into a hotel with a woman named Sarah.
When he woke up, all of his stuff was gone. So he asked me if I would give him a ride over there to Sarah's house so he can try to get his stuff back. We pulled up over there. There was a bigger white dude that was there.
What do you look like?
He was real tall, kind of chunky. I want to say he had red hair or blonde hair. And Craig said that guy's name is Jeremy, and he's supposed to be the husband of Sarah.
She says Craig told Sarah's husband he wanted his belongings back.
The guy told him she was in the room asleep and he wasn't going to wake her up.
Craig and Nicole left, but returned this morning to try again.
Craig gets out of the car, and he sees Sarah's car coming down the street and was fixing to get in.
She says a teenage boy was in the passenger seat of Sarah's car.
She stops, they talk. He was just asking, for his stuff back. And she's like, no. And then that's when that kid got out of the car and then went into the house. He come back out with the gun, and then he started shooting. I didn't know what to do. And then the guy went over and got in the car with Sarah and took off.
The guy that shot? How old does he look?
He looks about 16, 17 maybe. He's a tall, skinny, blonde-headed kid.
Once we found out that he's 16, 17 years old, you change your mindset a little bit, right? The resources are minimal. Like, how are they gonna get out of town? Do they have any money? They've got to lean on family. We've got a lot of information. We've got the address where they live. You know, if that kid was living there, I mean, there's gonna be stuff with his name on it, hopefully, inside the house.
Z, did you get the warrant?
Zanoni's executing a search warrant for this house, and he comes across this pill bottle in the name of Jeremy Campbell. Jeremy Campbell. Dude, here, look at this guy. This guy fits perfect.
That's not gonna be your suspect.
No, but that looks more like the husband that they're describing.
And there's a Sarah, 111 of 81.
Ooh, she's got warrants. And she's on file for homicide.
Jeremy's wife, 32-year-old Sarah Helton, was previously convicted of forgery, theft, and accessory to murder. She has a 3-year-old child with Jeremy.
So we've got 2 of the 3 identified, but not
our shooter.
Jeremy's records show a conviction from 4 years ago, contributing to the delinquency of a minor.
Jeremy Campbell was giving instructions to his son, William, to break into multiple vehicles. William Campbell, 12 years of age. It was pretty telling about the kind of guy Jeremy was. Taking William as a young kid and sending him to go break into cars. All right, let's find out who this kid is. Fits him perfect, look. Height, skinny, white guy, blonde.
We're dealing with a whole family of dangerous individuals that don't really have any conscience.
6 hours in, with Craig still hanging on.
Just so shook up right now.
We can get you out of here in a second, okay?
Is my friend still alive?
As far as I know, yes. Okay. I'm gonna show you 6 pictures. The guy that shot may or may not be in there. If he is, I just want you to point him out.
This right here.
That one right there?
That's what he looked like this morning.
We had our shooter, we had the getaway driver, and then we had this Jeremy Campbell character that fit in. We just didn't know how yet.
To hunt a whole family is kind of unusual. It's a team effort, it's everybody on deck, and the sharing of information is vital in this case.
Over the next 38 hours.
Anyone, her vehicle, I live in a small SUV.
Be a really dark color. It's got a paper tag, or at least it did earlier. How many black small SUVs are driving around Tulsa? Thousands. So what do? We started doing basically a grid search. Driving neighborhoods, looking in driveways.
I'm not giving up, but I think your odds are slim to none right now.
Frazier visits the hotel where Craig and Sarah stayed before the shooting.
I was hoping to get her car on video. I want to find something of them getting in or out of the car so we can kind of stop this needle in a haystack search. That's gonna be her for sure. Do you have any cameras out the door?
No, I don't.
And unfortunately, we came up empty-handed.
Back at homicide.
I was calling to check on a Craig Wingard. Okay, thanks. They're going through withdrawal procedures right now.
Pulling the plug on her.
Craig will be removed from life support.
Homicide is such a great loss. It's so traumatic and sudden and violent that it's a kind of a shock to the system.
Victim advocate Heather Jordan counseled Craig's family after his death.
It's tragic when anyone's murdered, but when you have someone who is a veteran, it does add another level of trauma to the situation.
You think about this guy who would put his life on the line for our country, and get out and you come home, and then to be killed like that, it's a hard thing to deal with. It'll be a murder warrant, as well as mom is going to be an accessory to murder warrant.
With only an hour left in the first 48, there's a surprise visitor.
Why would you show up? Your son just killed a man in broad daylight, and you're right in the middle of it. Why in the hell are you sitting in our office?
Oh, I remember this day big time. This is Craig getting ready to do something crazy on his bike. Craig was always amped up, wanting to ride bikes like all night long, like just very energetic. Craig was maybe a little bit of bravery, maybe a little bit of crazy and sketchy all into one.
Aaron became close with Craig, working with him at his bike shop.
It was totally generous. There was a couple of younger kids that hung out at the shop every day, and they just gave them bike parts when they needed them, and was always trying to help somebody out, I felt like. So when I found out that he had been murdered, that was just disturbing. Craig was a nice guy. You just don't think of people like that getting murdered. How he died was super messed up, and I was sad and mad all at the same time.
"47 hours into the investigation."
What's up, man?
I'm Detective Frazier. It's Detective Ritter.
The suspect's father, Jeremy, has turned up to issue a complaint.
Come to my house. My all gone. Doors open and everything's gone.
Really?
Search warrant laying on the couch.
Yeah. I mean, we did do a search warrant at your house. I mean, some stuff happened at your house this weekend. Do you know a guy named Craig?
Nope.
Okay, here's the thing. Craig came to your house to looking for his bicycle and his stuff. I know he did. People brought him there. They described you to a T at the door. They asked for Sarah, which is your wife, correct? Her girlfriend?
Since December.
You haven't seen Sarah since December?
No. So I don't know what's going on. If somebody come to my house talking to me, I'd beat his ass.
Nobody said he was talking to you.
You talk about a stolen bicycle or something? Come on, man.
Here's the issue. Here's the problem. The guy that talked to you that tried to get his bike back got shot in your front yard. Let's quit with the bull.
I think that was the first time in my police career that somebody got under my skin so much that it pissed me off.
Don't care?
I don't know nothing about it. I wasn't there.
What's your son's name?
William.
Yeah. Does he stay at that house with you over there?
Nope.
When was the last time he was there?
I haven't seen him in a year.
Okay, here's the deal. Everything that's come out of your mouth, other than the name to your kids, has been a lie.
You're the wrong dude, man.
I don't. There's not too many people that look like you, bud.
Yeah, I'm free to go.
Yeah, you're free to go.
Your kid shot and killed another man.
I haven't seen my kid in a long time.
I'm just telling you,
in your front yard that you've only been living in for 2.5 months.
He ain't never even been to my house.
Yes, he has.
He's fixing to catch an accessory charge for doing this.
Accessory charge.
Yeah. You're lying your ass off.
I don't know what the y'all was talking about.
Yeah, you do. And you're a terrible liar.
And this ain't my damn first murder case, neither.
Yeah, we don't care if you're scared to do time. We don't care if you're a badass.
I don't give a I ain't got nothing else to say. That's that. Can I leave?
Let's go.
See ya.
After that interview, we knew that we were going to have to find William and Sarah fast.
Tell your boy he's going down for murder.
Because Jeremy, we knew, was going to go tell them, hey, look, they know it was you. But now we're up against the time clock here.
Oh, dude. That went good.
I don't know what just happened.
The emotions of us individuals is something you can't control. But we have to just say, here's where you grow a little bit into your investigative experience.
As far as William and Sarah go, I just want to get him in custody.
I don't see any reason why we can't put him on the news.
No, I'm good with it. And Mom, too.
As the first 48 runs out,
Police say 17-year-old William Dean Campbell shot and killed Craig Wingard Sunday afternoon. Campbell and 32-year-old Sarah Nicole Helton drove away.
4 days in,
Homicide.
a local car dealer says they recently sold a black SUV to Sarah,
Doggone it.
who failed to make the payments.
Okay, and what is it?
According to the dealer, Sarah stole back the repossessed SUV.
Well, if we find the car, we will get it back to you.
She stole it back?
And she stole it back, disabled the GPS.
Oh.
We've got a great piece of evidence now. Now we're looking for one particular car. We're looking for a Pontiac Torrent. And now we're on the hunt again.
But a week goes by with no sign of Sarah's car.
Kicking my ass, this little 17-year-old.
The team searches neighborhoods of known associates of William and Sarah.
She doesn't realize what she's up against because we do not give up.
I'll take the west end.
Take the east side.
Where's the Torrent, damn it?
A Torrent with the paper tag.
5 miles away,
Driven by a white female.
detectives Ronnie Leatherman and Jason White may be in luck.
The Sarah girl we're looking for is in that SUV.
Sweet. Hang on, peoples.
We got her. Stopped at a dead end. Ronnie's approaching.
We hear that Ronnie's getting out of the car, and that scares me because, you know, I don't care how big you are, you can't stop a car.
She's taking off. Ronnie just off her. We lost it. We lost it somewhere northbound on Sheridan.
Damn it!
Our job is to chase bad guys and catch them, right? And that's our job.
How do you lose your murder suspect?
And they failed miserably at that point. So we let them have it for sure.
Can't go faster than a Torrent?
We passed. Dude, it was smoking us. It was brutal.
The next night,
Get on it. Sergeant Walker and Frazier, you got eyes on it?
Frazier spots William at a convenience store.
William's in the passenger seat of this car. The driver gets out and goes inside, so that leaves William by himself. And as we walk up, you can see that he's got a gun in his waistband with an extended magazine. It's like, oh, no. It's gonna end. Hopefully it ends where we all get to go home alive.
You got a 17-year-old kid wanted for murder, and as we approached the car, it was a situation. And he was sitting there with a gun in his waistband. Luckily, everything came out fine when we took the gun off him, but it could have turned out really bad.
William's demeanor, he's like jovial.
Wait, let's go ahead and see if we can figure that out.
It angered me some.
Let's see.
But by that demeanor that he had, it was like he was ready to talk about this case. When you get somebody smiling at you at the point of arrest with a gun in his lap, he's got something to say.
All right, man. July 5th. Yeah. You remember that day? Okay. Just tell me what happened.
Tell y'all, ain't making nothing up. Swag. Dude and my stepmom, you know, they talking, really kind of arguing. He got the trip and he was saying, no, I want my money, where's my backpack? I went inside to get my phone. He took her car keys out of the car, and we was trying to take her car. And I came back outside with the rifle, and I told him 3 times to give us back the keys. Each time he kept saying, you're not gonna shoot, you're not gonna shoot.
Okay.
And then, so yeah.
So then what? We got to go through the whole thing, man. So then what?
All right, and then, so I pulled the trigger, you know. I fired off about 8 to 9 shots. I'm not for sure. I wasn't trying to kill the man, or I'd have hit him all in his face. I was trying to get our keys back.
Okay. When you shot the first time, what'd he do?
I think I missed.
Okay.
I think I missed.
This kid's cold-blooded, right? No remorse at all whatsoever. No conscience at all whatsoever. The second time, what'd he do?
He stood there.
What about the third time he shot?
He stood there. He was eating them.
He was eating them?
I guess. I don't know. He just stood there. Like.
There's obviously something misfiring upstairs, because it's a reaction I wouldn't have. And most of the killers we catch don't have. But some of them are of a different mentality, and William had that.
About the time when I stopped shooting, that's when he hit the ground.
And then what?
She got in the car with me.
Okay. And you guys drove off? Where'd the rifle go? Come on, man, don't stop now.
It's in the river.
William, I don't think you threw it in the river. I can see in your face it's not in the river.
Alright, it was my dad. So I read it.
It was your dad?
Everything about William can be transposed to his family. That doesn't make it right for what he does, but it's not surprising that William ended up where he ended up.
You're gonna get a phone call. Who are you gonna call?
I don't think I can call nobody. I ain't got nobody to call.
William Campbell is charged with first-degree murder.
Yeah, that's my first murder confession right there. It felt great to get my first confession. And when we got the info that Jeremy threw the gun away, there was an immediate excitement and satisfaction.
Yeah, we got the most dangerous person out there, but we haven't ended this by any stretch of imagination, because we're still on to Sarah and Jeremy.
6 days later.
We've got a pretty good handle on finding him, but she's just been pretty slick. The neighbor saw them arguing, and she took off.
The Warrants squad heads to an area where Sarah and Jeremy were recently seen.
There really is no set way to catch a fugitive. Like, there's no handbook. But it really is like a little chess game and a little jigsaw puzzle.
Trying to stop her. Might be her.
When I spotted her, I pulled out from my little hiding spot and pulled in behind her.
Well, we might get lucky.
Just confirmed. I've seen her visual face. She is definitely here. You don't want me to stop her?
She's gonna run.
Lights and siren on, she sped up. I go, this is it. We're in a chase. She's gotten away before. I was determined that she wasn't gonna get away this time.
As soon as she sees the police car, she's gone when Chase was on.
Flat, she's on the sidewalk.
Speeds reached close to 80 miles an hour. This was scary dangerous because of the time of day, amount of traffic.
She smashed into a car.
It was obvious that she was desperate. willing to risk the welfare of the public to get away. I immediately thought, is she going to get out and run? But she couldn't open her driver's side because she had smashed into a metal pole.
What is wrong with you?
Thank you so much. Jump in! I couldn't stop. There was no brakes.
She was outside the roof, frantic. You know, she was bananas. Hey,
Please, I need to talk
you need to
please.
calm down.
No, he's gonna
Listen
kill my
to
kids.
me. Listen to me.
Oh my God.
Listen to me.
Jerry.
You need to calm down so that you can tell them what's going on here.
Please, he's gonna shoot me.
She's saying there's another guy in there, Tay-Tay, that had a gun to her head.
She's the only one over there, and she started saying, "Oh, he had a gun to my head. He had a gun to my head. He's telling me to drive."
She's on the phone.
Sarah's phone shows that she and Jeremy have been in contact.
Hey, Bryce. We're gonna go get Jeremy. Let's go get him. Woo! Well, I sent a couple of my guys up to his house. If I'm Jeremy, I wouldn't be at my house. But Jeremy was definitely overconfident. He was definitely cocky.
Big minivan, ready to go westbound on time.
And by the time we were pulling up, he was getting in the taxi cab to leave. Go ahead, Bryce, go. Put your hands up!
I was going to the store.
Yeah, well, you got a warrant, so you're going to jail.
A warrant?
Yeah, accessory to murder. I don't think this day's gonna get any better.
Oh, thank God. Have you guys found Tay-Tay?
So he was in the car during the chase?
Yeah, he was laying kind of in the back seat like this, and he had the gun right up the back of my head.
Where did he go?
I don't know if he jumped or rolled or what, but when the car was going like this, the door opened.
Okay, we're gonna start from the beginning.
On July 5th?
Yes,
Tell me what happened that day.
I went to pick up my 17-year-old stepson,
Who is?
William. Then some white guy had pulled up.
Sarah claims Craig came to her house to collect on a debt owed to Tay-Tay.
So we're trying to find out exactly why all this happened, okay? And just listen, it has nothing to do with the debt. It has zero to do with it.
That's what
I
I
already
said.
talked to William. You could see that moment. You could see that, oh my gosh, I'm in a lot of trouble. Which is when the interview turned.
I'm telling you what Jeremy's told me to tell you, okay?
What do you mean you're telling us what Jeremy's telling
This is what
you?
he told me to tell you. He thinks he's gonna get in trouble and charged and all this stuff.
Who, Jeremy?
Yeah.
So everything you've told us is not true?
It
and it's
is-
what
a lot
Jeremy-
of it is true.
Okay, but not 100% of it.
No.
When she says that Jeremy told her to lie, that was probably the truth. Jeremy ruled through physical violence and mental violence.
I met Craig at the Hilton Airport.
Okay, keep going, you're doing good.
Okay, when I got there, Jeremy didn't call my phone. And
So
he
what
told
do you-
me, you better bring some money and you better roll that dude.
She admits to robbing Craig, and that was the reason he showed up at her and Jeremy's house.
So,
Okay, the day that he got shot, he came to my driver's window. He was trying to take the keys out of my car, and then when William come out, he come out of the house and he shot him. When the shots stopped, William got in the car and he said, "Mom, just go."
When all this stuff goes down, are you willing to testify to Jeremy's involvement in this?
Absolutely.
Jeremy refuses to talk without a lawyer. He and Sarah are both charged with accessory to murder.
it felt great to have everybody in custody, and I couldn't wait to put a bow on it and hand it off.
We had a really strong case along with a statement from William. So we made the decision early on that we were going after William first. My name is Julie Doss. I was the lead prosecutor in the case of the state of Oklahoma versus William Campbell. One of the things that we noticed immediately upon looking at this case was that there was probably going to be some type of self-defense claim. That was a big hurdle that we thought we were going to have to get over.
But William's defense presents another, even bolder strategy.
The pretrial motion we are most concerned about was the stand your ground hearing.
Stand your ground says that if you're in your home or if you're in your car, you have a reasonable belief that you are about to be harmed if someone tries to forcibly enter. And if you are victorious at a stand your ground hearing, you're immune from prosecution. If it was found that William had a right to shoot Craig, then the cases against Sarah and Jeremy fall as well. We're keeping all three as defendants or we're losing all three. If we lost a stand your ground hearing, this case was over.
The stand your ground statute was adopted in Oklahoma so that homeowners would have the right to defend themselves against intruders. Stand your ground was meant as a shield for people who aren't committing crimes who are attacked by criminals.
But what happens is defendants try to use this statute in a way in which it was not intended.
Now it's primarily used to try to get out of killing somebody unlawfully.
And I told him 3 times to give us back the keys.
We knew the argument that Craig had reached into the open window of Sarah's vehicle and pulled out her keys.
And we knew that the defense was going to say that this confrontation was an aggressive, unlawful attack upon the family, and therefore they had the right to use lethal force.
10 months after William's arrest, his defense is granted their motion.
Kevin and I were really concerned about this stand your ground hearing.
Doss and Keller only have 2 months to prepare.
We have an immense responsibility to families like Craig's, and prosecutors take that responsibility to heart. It was hard to sleep because your mind is still racing about what do I need to do to prepare? How can I keep this immunity from ending this case?
William's stand your ground hearing begins. His defense calls just one witness, his stepmother, Sarah Helton.
At her interview with police, she was completely scattered. She was telling one story after another.
He was laying right in the back seat like this, and he had the gun right up the back of my head.
But at the stand your ground hearing, Sarah was much calmer. She was very prepared.
Sarah's explanation was, at the hearing, she was delivering the real story. So for the first time ever, we were getting what she was saying was the truth.
She testified that her acquaintance with Craig was through methamphetamine distribution.
In the toxicology report, the victim had methamphetamine in the system. The defense was trying to make Craig into a monster to make him seem like somebody who had a higher capacity to be violent.
She testified that Craig was advancing on William and that William had no choice but to defend himself by shooting and killing Craig.
Now it's the prosecution's turn to cross-examine Sarah.
Our strategy with Sarah was to take her lies she told police and contrast them to the narrative that all the eyewitnesses told from the murder case.
Kevin was able to use that statement she had previously given and just throw it back in her face over and over and over. Kevin was absolutely taking it to her. It was fun to watch.
But if the judge believes Sarah's testimony, he could decide to set William free.
Judge LaFortune ruled in the state's favor and denied the stand your ground immunity. That was a huge, huge victory for the state. But we still knew we had to go before a jury.
And William's defense is mounting a new argument.
We were expecting at trial self-defense, and we now had to prove that self-defense wasn't the case to 12 citizens, and we had to do it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Eight months later, William's jury trial begins. The state calls to the stand one of Jeremy's neighbors.
She was a completely independent witness. She didn't know Craig. She didn't know any of these people. She was able to describe exactly what happened.
We have Jeremy Campbell's house up here, a house caddy corner where we have an eyewitness.
The neighbor testifies that Craig was not the aggressor when William shot him.
William advanced forward down the driveway. Craig was actually in the process of walking away. According to this eyewitness, he had no weapon in his hand. And so in those circumstances, this isn't self-defense, this is just murder.
On the second day of the trial, the state's most persuasive evidence comes from William himself.
I think I missed.
Okay.
I think I missed.
William's interview created a strong reaction from the jury. There's a chemistry to the courtroom, and you can feel it. Jurors shift in their seats, stop taking notes. Their eyes get bigger.
What about the third time he shot?
He stood there.
That interview was chilling. And that clearly showed to this jury that we weren't talking about a little youngster who was protecting people. We were talking about a cold-blooded killer. We became more and more confident that self-defense was not being shown.
But the defense was going to find something else in her toolbox.
Closing argument by the defense took a complete new turn.
And that was to find sympathy for the defendant. The defense is not going to give up. So in closing argument, we saw them do a pivot. They really leaned into a sympathy narrative for the defendant.
The defense counsel tries to portray William's home life and the bad situation he grew up in as mitigating circumstances.
He was curated from the cradle to be a criminal. He had no chance to have a normal, structured life.
If this kid had a different upbringing, is he going to do what he did?
The defense attorney skillfully uses the police interview video to create sympathy for William.
You're going to get a phone call. Who are you going to call?
I think I can't call nobody. I ain't nobody to call.
Defense counsel used that same interview that the state was using, but she had a different take on it.
Saying, look, he's scared to even rat out his parents.
Where'd the rifle go? Come on, man, don't stop now.
All right, it was my dad.
The defense portrayed William as a child that was taking the rap for his parents, and he was being tried for a crime where he was only trying to help. So defense counsel asked the jury to please consider second-degree murder and only sentence him to 10 years.
Craig's parents' reaction is, what are you talking about? None of that matters. He chose to do what he did that day. Craig's family having to sit there and listen to how William was growing up in a terrible household, it was extremely difficult for them.
Day 3 of William's trial. It takes the jury less than 2 hours to decide their verdict.
The Tulsa jury says an 18-year-old should be sent to prison for life. William Campbell was found guilty this afternoon of first-degree murder.
I don't feel any remorse towards him. Could his life been different? Yes, but William made those choices. Let's save the next William when he's a young kid and lead him in the right direction. William's right where he should be.
After William's case is over, now we have to move on to Sarah and Jeremy.
We had two very different cases. Her involvement as an accessory was pretty severe, but I think Jeremy was the shot caller for the cover-up.
We need Jeremy to go to prison. He's the real patriarch of this mess.
But to prosecute Jeremy, we needed Sarah.
Are you willing to testify to Jeremy's involvement in this?
Absolutely.
But when she came into court, she had Jeremy's name tattooed on her arm, and she quickly reneged on that agreement.
Who knows why Sarah would be so loyal to him? Was it out of love for him? Was it out of fear? But at that point, in order to get the most justice we could possibly get for Craig, we decided to make plea deals with both Sarah and Jeremy.
Sarah Helton and Jeremy Campbell both pleaded guilty to accessory.
Sarah received a 27-year sentence, 17 years in and 10 out on a suspended sentence. Jeremy got a 10-year sentence, 7 years in the penitentiary, and then 3 years on probation.
Seven years after Craig's murder,
We used to come here all the time.
his friend Aaron rides to remember him.
This is one of his favorite parks to ride, and I miss him a lot. The way I would honor Craig is go and ride some spots that we like to ride. That's the only way I knew how to honor the guy. That would actually mean something to
Texas 1987 cold case solved. 39-year-old Secret Shocks investigator. The last person to see Daniel Mercer alive remembered one thing more clearly than anything else: the headlight. Two white beams cutting through the darkness on a lonely Texas road. A truck slowing beside the shoulder, then disappearing. 39 years later, those headlights would become the center of a revelation investigators never expected to hear. In the summer of 1987, Daniel Mercer was 29 years old. He lived in a small Texas community where people recognized familiar cars, familiar faces, familiar routines. Nothing about the night he vanished seemed extraordinary at first. There was no dramatic argument in public, no frantic phone call, no witness who reported a struggle. Daniel simply left one place and never reached the next. His car was found the following morning. The driver's door was unlocked. The keys were still inside. His wallet was on the seat. But Daniel was gone. At first, investigators believed they were dealing with a voluntary disappearance. People disappear, especially when their personal lives are complicated. Maybe he wanted a fresh start. Maybe he had debts. Maybe he had been hiding something. Maybe he had simply driven away and did not want anyone to know where he was going. But there was one problem. Daniel had left behind the things he would have needed if he planned to disappear: his identification, his money, his medication, and a handwritten note on the kitchen table that contained only 4 words: "I need to talk." That sentence would sit in an evidence file for decades. The investigation began with a search along the rural road where Daniel's vehicle had been discovered. Officers walked through tall grass with flashlights. They checked drainage ditches. They searched nearby fields and abandoned structures. A helicopter was brought in. Volunteers joined the effort. Nothing. No body. No weapon. No clear evidence of violence. Only tire tracks near the shoulder and a faint second set of impressions that seemed to belong to another vehicle. The tracks were photographed. Then, somehow, they were overlooked. Daniel's family refused to accept that he had simply vanished. His mother called hospitals. His sister contacted friends. Posters appeared in gas stations, grocery stores, and telephone poles. His photograph was carried by newspapers for several weeks. Then the story disappeared. The town moved on. The file did not. It remained in a cabinet surrounded by hundreds of other unresolved cases. Dust accumulated on the folder. Detectives retired. Witnesses moved away. Memories changed. And the name Daniel Mercer became something people mentioned less and less. But there was one man who never stopped looking. Detective Raymond Cole had been a young investigator when Daniel disappeared. He had participated in the original search and had been among the officers who stood beside the abandoned car that morning. Cole always believed something was wrong, not because of what investigators found, because of what they did not find. There was no evidence Daniel had packed clothes, no evidence he had withdrawn money, no evidence he had purchased a ticket, no evidence he had contacted anyone outside Texas. His disappearance made no practical sense, and Cole remembered another detail. The driver's seat had been pushed backward. Daniel was not tall enough to drive comfortably that way. Someone else may have been sitting behind the wheel. For years, Cole kept that detail in his memory. He eventually retired. The case remained unsolved. Then, in 2025, a digital evidence project began reviewing old Texas case files. Thousands of documents were scanned. Photographs were digitized. Handwritten reports were entered into searchable databases. Daniel Mercer's file surfaced again. A younger investigator named Elena Ruiz opened it. She expected another dead-end disappearance. Instead, she found something buried inside the original evidence photographs. A photograph taken at 6:42 that morning. Daniel's car sat beside the road. Behind it, almost invisible beneath the glare of the rising sun, was a second set of tire impressions. Ruiz enlarged the image. The tracks were clearer than anyone had realized. The tread pattern was distinctive. Not a passenger car, a light-duty pickup. And near the driver's side door was something else, a dark mark on the ground. At first, it looked like oil. Then Ruiz noticed the shape. It was not oil. It was blood. The original investigators had missed it. 38 years earlier, the technology had not been available to see what the photograph contained. Now the image could be enhanced. The dark stain became unmistakable. The case changed immediately. Daniel Mercer had not simply disappeared. Someone had been there, and someone had tried to erase the evidence. The investigation reopened. Ruiz began with the tire tracks. That decision led investigators into old vehicle registration records, insurance documents, and property files. They searched for pickup trucks matching the tread pattern and found dozens, but one name appeared repeatedly near Daniel's timeline: Thomas Vance, a local contractor. Vance had been 41 in 1987. He knew Daniel. He had worked on several properties where Daniel's company had performed electrical repair. At the time, Vance had told investigators he had not seen Daniel that night. His original statement was short. He claimed he had been home, alone. No witnesses, no receipts, no telephone records, nothing. For decades, nobody had challenged him. Now, investigators did. Vance had died in 2011, but his house still existed. And after his death, the property had passed to his daughter. Ruiz obtained permission to search an old storage building behind the house. Inside were tools, rusted machinery, boxes of photographs, and decades of forgotten paperwork. Then investigators found a photograph. It showed Vance standing beside a white pickup truck. The photograph had been taken in 1987. The truck's tires were visible. Investigators compared the tread. The pattern matched the tracks beside Daniel's car, but that was not enough. A matching tire did not prove murder. Ruiz needed something stronger. She returned to Daniel's original file, the 4-word note: "I need to talk." She wondered who Daniel intended to talk to. Then she found a second document. It was a financial record. 3 days before his disappearance, Daniel had withdrawn a substantial amount of money. Not enough to flee the country. Enough to make someone nervous. The withdrawal was connected to a business account. And beside the transaction was a handwritten notation: Vance. Suddenly, the case had a possible motive. Daniel may have discovered something. Something involving money. Something involving Thomas Vance. But the investigators still had no proof of what happened after Daniel left his home. Then came the breakthrough nobody expected. A retired mechanic contacted police. He had seen the news about the reopened investigation. He was 87 years old. His name was Walter Hayes, and he said he remembered Daniel's truck. More importantly, he remembered the night. Hayes had operated a small repair shop in 1987. He told investigators that shortly before midnight, a white pickup had stopped outside his property. The driver was Thomas Vance. There was another person in the truck. Hayes could not identify him, but he remembered the passenger was slumped forward. At the time, Hayes assumed the man was drunk. He never reported it. He had no reason to believe he had witnessed a crime until he saw Daniel Mercer's photograph nearly 4 decades later. Then Hayes remembered the jacket. Daniel had been wearing a dark jacket the night he vanished. The passenger had been wearing the same kind of jacket. Investigators returned to the original evidence. The jacket had never been recovered, but a photograph of Daniel taken 2 days before his disappearance showed the same clothing. Now they had a witness, a vehicle, a financial connection, possible blood evidence, and a man who had lied about his whereabouts. Still, one question remained. Where was Daniel? Investigators began searching properties connected to Vance. One location stood out, an abandoned ranch outside town. Vance had leased the property in 1986. The lease ended months after Daniel disappeared. The ranch contained an old irrigation well. For decades, nobody had considered it important. Ruiz did. Ground-penetrating radar was brought to the property. The scan revealed a disturbance near the well. Investigators dug. The first shovel broke through dry earth. The second exposed old fabric. Then bone. The search stopped. The scene became silent. For 39 years, Daniel Mercer had been missing. Now investigators believed they had finally found him. The remains were recovered carefully. DNA testing was ordered. Weeks passed. Then the result arrived. The remains belonged to Daniel Mercer. The cold case was no longer a disappearance. It was a homicide, and the secret buried beneath that Texas soil had survived almost for decades. But the most shocking discovery was still waiting inside the old evidence file, because when investigators reconstructed the timeline, they realized Thomas Vance had not been the only person involved. There had been another vehicle, another witness, another name, and that name had been written in Daniel Mercer's notebook just hours before he vanished. The final line read, "Ask him about the money." Investigators stared at the word. The case had finally begun to speak, and after 39 years of silence, the truth was no longer bare. It was coming back. The discovery of Daniel Mercer's remains changed everything, but it did not answer the question investigators had carried for nearly 4 decades. Who killed him? The evidence pointed toward Thomas Vance, but investigators knew suspicion was not enough. Vance was dead. He could not be interrogated. He could not explain the tire track. He could not explain the blood. He could not explain why a witness remembered seeing him with someone who appeared unconscious. And he could not explain the financial records connecting him to Daniel. The case needed one final bridge between evidence and truth. That bridge appeared in an unexpected place, a storage locker. After Vance died, his family had kept several boxes of personal belongings in a rented storage unit. The unit had been forgotten for years. When investigators learned about it, they obtained permission to search. Inside were old invoices, photographs, receipts, and handwritten notebooks. One notebook contained dates, names, amounts, and initials. Investigators immediately recognized one set of initials, DM, Daniel Mercer. Next to the initials was a number, $18,000. The same amount Daniel had withdrawn shortly before his disappearance. Then came another notation, paid. Investigators froze. Daniel had not simply discovered a financial irregularity. He had apparently been part of a transaction. The money had moved through several accounts connected to Vance, and someone had been trying to hide it. The second set of initials was even more important. RH, Robert Hale, the man who had never been publicly connected to Daniel's disappearance. But when investigators searched the old records, they found something startling. Hale had been a business partner of Vance. He had also owned the second vehicle identified near Daniel's abandoned car. The investigation now expanded. Robert Hale had died in 1998. Again, the suspect was beyond questioning. But unlike Vance, Hale had left behind family members, and one of them remembered something. His daughter told investigators that her father had once confessed to being involved in a terrible mistake. He never gave her a name. He never described a murder. But he had repeatedly warned her never to discuss what happened at the old ranch. That sentence sent investigators back to the property. The well had been only part of the story. Ground-penetrating radar was used again. This time, investigators searched the entire surrounding area. A second disturbance appeared beneath an old concrete slab. Underneath it was a metal container. Inside were documents sealed in plastic. Most were damaged. One was not. A handwritten ledger. The dates matched the weeks before Daniel disappeared. The entries showed payments, cash, materials, labor, and one final entry. Mercer knows. 3 words. Enough to explain why Daniel had become a threat, but investigators still needed to understand what Daniel knew. The answer came from his former co-worker. A man named James Porter had worked with Daniel in 1987. Porter remembered Daniel being nervous during the final week of his life. He said Daniel believed someone was stealing money from a construction project. Daniel had discovered invoices for work that had never been performed. The payments went through shell companies. The companies were connected to Vance and Hale. Daniel had intended to expose them. That explained the withdrawal. It explained the note. It explained the confrontation. And it provided a motive. But the murder itself remained uncertain. Investigators reconstructed the final night minnow by minnow. At 8:14 p.m., Daniel left his home. At 8:31, he stopped at a gas station. At 9:02, he was seen entering a restaurant. At 9:47, he left. At approximately 10:20, his vehicle appeared on the rural road. Sometime after that, another vehicle arrived. Then Daniel disappeared. The original investigation had assumed Daniel drove away alone. The new evidence suggested otherwise. His car had been stopped. The keys remained inside. The passenger seat contained traces of soil matching the ranch, and a small piece of blue fabric found near the vehicle matched material recovered from the old ranch site. The evidence was becoming impossible to dismiss, but investigators still needed the connection to Vance. They found it in a photograph. A family photograph taken in 1988. Vance stood beside his pickup. On the truck bed was a distinctive toolbox. The same toolbox appeared in a photograph taken at the ranch. Investigators compared the photographs digitally. The scratches, the dents, the handle, everything matched. The truck had been at the ranch, and the ranch was where Daniel's remains were eventually discovered. Then came the most disturbing revelation. The old well had been filled with concrete years after Daniel's disappearance. Why? Investigators checked property records. The work had been authorized by Vance. The concrete had been poured only 6 weeks after Daniel vanished. It was not a coincidence. It was an attempt to hide something. For 39 years, the truth had been sealed beneath the ground. Now the investigators were finally pulling it apart. The case was approaching its final answer, but one mystery remained. Who had written Mercer knows? Was it Vance? Was it Hale? Or was it Daniel himself? Forensic examination of the handwriting produced the answer. The note was written by Daniel. He had been documenting what he knew. He had been afraid, and he had understood that something was about to happen. That realization transformed the case from a disappearance into something much darker. Daniel had not walked into the night unknowingly. He had suspected danger. He had tried to protect himself. He had left a trail, and for 39 years, nobody had been able to follow it. Until now, investigators began comparing every piece of evidence: the financial records, the tire tracks, the blood stain, the witness statement, the ranch, the ledger, the truck, the concrete, the DNA. Everything pointed in the same direction, but prosecutors still faced a problem. Both principal suspects were dead. There could be no traditional murder trial. Instead, investigators focused on determining exactly what happened and whether anyone living had helped conceal it. That search led them to a man nobody had expected, a former employee of Vance. His name was Edward Lawson. In 1987, Lawson had been 23. He worked occasional jobs at the ranch. He remembered seeing Vance and Hale there the night Daniel disappeared. He remembered hearing an argument. He remembered a loud impact, and he remembered Vance telling him something chilling. Forget what you heard. Lawson had kept silent for 39 years. He said he was afraid. He said he believed Vance would destroy his life. He said he had spent decades wondering whether remaining silent had made him part of the crime. Now, sitting across from investigators, he finally told them everything he remembered. Daniel had confronted Vance about the missing money. Hale was there. The argument became violent. Daniel was struck. He collapsed. Lawson said Vance panicked. Hale told him they had to make it look like Daniel had disappeared voluntarily. They moved him. They drove his car. They created the appearance of a disappearance. Then they took Daniel to the ranch. The rest became a secret shared by two men until one died. Then the other. And the secret remained buried. But secrets do not always disappear. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they survive inside photographs, inside ledgers, inside forgotten memories, inside 4 words written on a kitchen table. I need to talk. 39 years later, Daniel Mercer finally got that chance. His story was heard again. His family received an answer. And investigators finally closed the file that had haunted them for decades. But the case left behind one final question. How many other cold cases were sitting inside forgotten boxes? How many photographs contained evidence nobody had noticed? How many witnesses had carried secrets into old age? And how many families were still waiting for someone to look again? In the Texas community where Daniel disappeared, people remembered him differently after the discovery. Not as a name on an old poster, not as a photograph fading in a newspaper archive, not as another missing person whose fate was never known. He became Daniel again, a son, a brother, a friend, a man who had walked into the night believing he still had time to solve a problem. He did not know that someone else had already decided his fate. For decades, the road where his car was found remained ordinary. Cars passed, trucks passed, people drove home. Nobody knew that beneath the silence was a story waiting to be uncovered. Then investigators came back. They looked at the photographs again. They followed the tire tracks. They opened the forgotten file. And eventually they found what time had failed to erase. The truth. Not clean, not simple, not comforting, but real. The Texas cold case had finally been solved, and the secret that survived 39 years had finally run out of places to hide. The last photograph taken at the ranch showed nothing unusual, just an empty field, a weathered structure, a line of trees disappearing into the distance. But now investigators knew what had happened there. They knew why the concrete had been poured. They knew why the records had vanished. They knew why witnesses had remained silent. And they knew why Daniel's car had been left on that road. The headlights were gone. The truck was gone. The men responsible were gone. Only the evidence remained. Waiting. Silent. Patient. Until someone finally looked closely enough. And after 39 years, the silence broke. Texas 1987 cold case solved. 39-year-old secret shocks investigator. The confession changed the case, but it did not end it. Edward Lawson had finally spoken. After 39 years, investigators had a witness who claimed he had been at the ranch the night Daniel Mercer disappeared. He described the argument, he described the impact, he described the panic that followed. But there was something in Lawson's story that investigators could not ignore. He said Daniel was still alive after he was struck. That meant the timeline was different from what everyone had believed. Daniel had not died immediately. He had survived the attack. And someone had made a decision about what happened next. Lawson sat across from investigators with his hands trembling. His memory was old, damaged by time, but certain details had never left him. The sound of Daniel breathing. The sound of Vance arguing with Hale. The opening of the truck door. And then the words Lawson remembered most clearly. We can't take him to a hospital. That sentence became the center of the reopened investigation. Because if Daniel was alive, then the people responsible had choices. They could have called for help. They could have taken him to a hospital. They could have walked away. Instead, they chose silence. Investigators returned to the ranch. The property looked nothing like it had in 1987. The old structure was gone. The irrigation equipment had been replaced. Trees had grown across parts of the land, but beneath the surface, the investigators found the remains of the original landscape. And with modern forensic technology, they could reconstruct it. The location of the old well, the concrete slab, the tire tracks preserved in photographs, the position of the abandoned vehicle, everything formed a disturbing pattern. Daniel's car had not been abandoned randomly. It had been positioned to make investigators believe he had simply walked away. The driver's door was left unlocked. The keys remained inside. His wallet was visible. It looked careless, almost too obvious. Now investigators believed that was the point. Someone wanted police to assume Daniel had disappeared voluntarily. They wanted the first hours of the investigation to move in the wrong direction, and it worked. For decades. Then investigators examined another overlooked piece of evidence, a receipt. It had been found inside Daniel's car in 1987. At the time, nobody thought it mattered. The receipt was from a hardware store. The purchase had been made that evening. 2 rolls of heavy plastic sheeting, a length of rope, industrial-strength tape. Investigators had originally assumed Daniel bought the materials for work. Now they asked a different question. Why would a man planning to confront someone about stolen money purchase those items? The answer was uncomfortable. Perhaps Daniel had been preparing to collect evidence. Perhaps he expected to find documents. Perhaps he intended to confront Vance and secure proof before going to police. But there was another possibility. Someone else had placed those items in his vehicle. Investigators checked the store's archived records. The transaction had been paid in cash. There was no customer identification, but the store had once operated a security camera. The footage had been erased decades earlier. The equipment itself was gone. Another dead end. Except for one detail. A former employee remembered the purchase. She was elderly now, living several counties away. She told investigators that Daniel had not bought the item. A man matching Vance's description had. The employee had assumed the man was purchasing supplies for construction. She remembered because he had complained about the price. That memory became significant. If Vance had purchased the materials, why were they inside Daniel's car? Investigators believed they finally understood. Daniel had been taken to the ranch. The materials were used there. Then someone returned to Daniel's car and placed the remaining supplies inside. It created another false trail. A trail suggesting Daniel had planned something himself, but the evidence kept pointing backward, toward Vance, toward Hale, toward the ranch, and toward the night when 3 men knew something terrible had happened. Lawson's testimony also revealed something investigators had not known. Daniel had confronted Vance before, not once, 3 times. The first confrontation happened weeks before the disappearance. Daniel accused Vance of falsifying invoices. Vance denied everything. The second confrontation happened days later. Daniel told a co-worker he had found another suspicious payment. The third happened on the night he vanished. That was the confrontation that never ended normally. Investigators searched for the original invoice. Most had disappeared, but one survived. It had been stored in an old accounting box belonging to Daniel's former employer. The invoice showed a payment for electrical work at a property Daniel had never visited. His name appeared on the paperwork, but the signature was wrong. Forensic handwriting analysis confirmed it. Daniel had not signed the document. Someone had forged his name. The amount was $18,000, the exact amount Daniel withdrew from the business account. Investigators now had a possible explanation for everything. Daniel discovered that money was being diverted. He confronted the people responsible. He withdrew the money, possibly intending to preserve it as evidence. He wrote down what he knew. Then he disappeared. But investigators still could not prove that Vance had personally killed him. Lawson's testimony suggested Vance had been present. The physical evidence placed his truck near the scene. The financial records established a motive. The ranch connected him to the burial site. But the case was nearly 40 years old. Every piece of evidence had to survive scrutiny. Every memory had to be tested. Every assumption had to be challenged. Then forensic specialists examined the blue fabric recovered near Daniel's vehicle. At first, it had been considered meaningless. Now it was compared with photographs of Vance's truck. The fabric was from a blanket stored inside the vehicle. A small fragment had torn away. The fibers were consistent. It was not absolute proof, but it was another connection. Then investigators examined the bloodstain. Modern testing produced a partial DNA profile. The sample was degraded, but it was consistent with Daniel. That meant Daniel had been injured beside his vehicle. He had not simply driven away. Someone had assaulted him there, and then transported him. The route from the roadside to the ranch was less than 20 minutes. Investigators recreated the drop at night, in darkness, using the same rural roads. The route matched Lawson's description. The timing matched the witness statements. The location matched the tire evidence. For the first time, investigators could see the final hours of Daniel's life as a continuous sequence. He left home. He drove toward the confrontation. He met Vance. The argument began. Something went wrong. Daniel was injured. His car was abandoned. His body was transported to the ranch. And then the secret began. But there was still one missing piece. Hale. What had Robert Hale done? Lawson claimed Hale was present. The ledger contained his initials. His vehicle was associated with the area, but investigators wanted independent evidence. They searched Hale's old property records. A strange detail emerged. The morning after Daniel disappeared, Hale purchased concrete. A large quantity. Enough to cover the old well. The purchase was made in cash. The receipt had survived inside a contractor's archive. The date was exact. The day after Daniel vanished. Investigators stared at the document. For 39 years, the concrete had been treated as an ordinary property improvement. Now it looked like concealment. Hale had purchased the material immediately after Daniel disappeared. Vance controlled the property, and Daniel's remains were later found beneath the same area. The coincidence was almost impossible to ignore. But then something even stranger surfaced. A letter. It had been written by Hale several months after Daniel disappeared. The letter was addressed to Vance. It contained only a few lines. Most were ordinary business language, but one sentence stood out. We need to make sure the story stays the same. Investigators compared the handwriting. It was Hale's. The letter did not mention Daniel by name. It did not describe a murder. It did not contain an explicit confession. But in the context of the evidence, it became devastating. 2 men. One story. One abandoned car. One buried secret. And a victim who had vanished without a trace. Until nearly 4 decades later, investigators then asked the question that had haunted the case from the beginning. Why had no one found Daniel sooner? The answer was brutally simple. The original search had focused on the wrong places. Police searched roads, fields, waterways, buildings. They searched for a man who had chosen to disappear. They did not search deeply enough for a man who had been hidden. The ranch was never properly examined. The well was never excavated. The concrete was never questioned. And the tire tracks were never connected to a suspect. A series of small failures had created one enormous silence. Daniel's family lived with that silence for 39 years. Every birthday brought the same question. Where is he? Every holiday carried the same empty space. Every unidentified body discovered anywhere in Texas created another moment of fear. Maybe this was him. Maybe this was finally the answer. Then the phone rang. The investigators were calling with the news the family had waited decades to hear. They had found Daniel. He was no longer missing. But the truth was darker than anyone had imagined. He had not left. He had not abandoned his family. He had not chosen another life. Someone had taken that choice away from him. And now investigators were determined to reconstruct the final minutes, not just to solve the case, but to give Daniel's family something they had never been given before, a complete story. Because for 39 years, they had lived with a question. Now they were finally getting an answer. And the answer began with a truck on a dark Texas road, a forgotten tire track, and 4 words left behind by a man who seemed to know that he might not come home. I need to talk. This time, investigators were listening. The road looked smaller than anyone remembered. Detective Elena Ruiz stood on the gravel shoulder just before sunrise, holding the original crime scene photograph beside the modern landscape. The fence line had shifted, mesquite trees had grown thicker, utility poles had been replaced, yet the curve in the road was unmistakable. Daniel Mercer had stopped here. Someone else had stopped here. Everything that followed had been hidden behind 39 years of silence. Forensic specialists stretched measuring tape across the shoulder, matching distances recorded in fading police notes from 1987. Every inch mattered now. The position of Daniel's abandoned car, the angle of the tire track, the location of the bloodstain that had remained invisible until digital enhancement exposed it decades later. Then another forgotten detail surfaced. The original evidence log listed tiny glass fragments collected near the driver's door. At the time, officers believed they came from Daniel's own vehicle. Nobody questioned them. Ruiz sent the preserved fragments to a forensic laboratory. Days later, the report arrived. The glass did not belong to Daniel's sedan. It matched tempered safety glass commonly used in pickup truck side windows during the mid-1980s. Someone else's vehicle had been damaged during the confrontation. The investigation took another sharp turn. If Vance's truck had suffered damage, there might have been repair. Old insurance records had already been searched without success. This time, investigators looked elsewhere. Body shops, independent mechanics, county business licenses. One small repair invoice survived inside the records of a garage that closed decades earlier. Vehicle, white pickup. Owner, Thomas Vance. Repair date, 2 days after Daniel disappeared. Work performed, replaced passenger side window. The mechanic who completed the repair had died years earlier, but his handwritten note remained. Window shattered. Customer requested immediate repair. Immediate. Not next week. Not when convenient. Immediately after Daniel vanished, Ruiz pinned the invoice beside the crime scene photograph. Another piece fell into place. Then came something stranger. A fingerprint. Back in 1987, investigators dusted Daniel's car for prints. Most belonged to Daniel, several belonged to family members. One partial print remained unidentified because comparison technology was limited. The preserved lift card had survived. Modern scanning produced a clearer image. The fingerprint was incomplete. Not enough for an automatic match, but enough for manual comparison. Investigators searched archived employment records. Thomas Vance had submitted fingerprints years later for a contractor licensing application. Comparison began, ridge by ridge, bifurcation by bifurcation, ending ridge, core, delta. The forensic examiner finally looked up. Consistent. Not conclusive enough for a criminal conviction by itself, but consistent enough to place Vance's hand inside Daniel's vehicle. Another coincidence disappeared. Meanwhile, Robert Hale's past grew dark. Financial investigators uncovered shell companies registered under relatives' names, construction contracts, inflated invoices, cash withdrawals. Everything pointed toward a long-running fraud operation that had escaped attention for years. Daniel had not stumbled into one dishonest payment. He had uncovered an entire system, and systems fight to survive. Lawson's testimony continued producing new leads. During a second interview, investigators asked him about the argument at the ranch. This time he remembered another sentence. Daniel shouted it. "You used my name." Silence filled the interview room. Investigators exchanged glances. The forged invoice, Daniel's signature, the missing money. Everything connected. Lawson described Daniel holding papers in his hand. Then Hale grabbed them. The papers scattered across the ground. Some blew toward the fence. Lawson said nobody picked them up. The ranch had changed enormously since then. Rain, wind, floods, animals, decades of weather. Still, investigators searched the fence line. Metal detectors swept through dry grass. Volunteers sifted soil. Most discoveries were worthless. Rusted can, wire, broken tools. Then someone uncovered a corroded binder clip. A few feet away came something almost impossible. Fragments of paper. Water damaged? Nearly destroyed. Forensic specialists carefully preserved every piece. Advanced imaging revealed faint writing beneath stain. Only a few words remained readable. Invoice. Electrical. Payment. And part of Daniel's handwriting. The fragments could not reconstruct the entire document, but they confirmed something extraordinary. Lawson's memory had been telling the truth. The confrontation involved paperwork. Evidence had literally blown into the Texas swamp, and tiny pieces had survived. The reopened case became national news. Television crews arrived. Headlines exploded. Texas 1987, cold case solved. Buried evidence shocks investigators. 39-year mystery unraveling. Reporters crowded outside the sheriff's office. Ruiz ignored them. She wanted evidence, not headlines. But publicity created consequences. People started talking. Old memories surfaced. Phone lines filled. Some tips were useless. Some contradicted each other. One changed everything. A woman named Linda Harper called investigators. She had dated Robert Hale's younger brother in 1987. She remembered attending a barbecue 1 week after Daniel disappeared. Vance was there. Hale was there. Both men looked terrified. She remembered because Hale refused to let anyone go near the white pickup parked behind the barn. At one point she asked why. His answer chilled her decades later. "Don't touch it. I'm getting rid of it." The truck disappeared shortly afterward. Investigators searched vehicle transfer records. The pickup had been sold, then resold, then scrapped in the early 1990s. The vehicle itself no longer existed, but photographs did. One buyer had photographed it before restoring another truck nearby. The white pickup appeared in the background. Ruiz enlarged the image. The passenger side window was brand new, fresh trim, different tint. Exactly where the repair invoice said the glass had been replaced. Another thread tightened. Meanwhile, forensic anthropologists continued examining Daniel's remains. The injuries told a complicated story. A fracture behind the ear, broken ribs, damage consistent with blunt force trauma. But another finding stunned investigators. There were signs that Daniel had survived for some time after the initial blow. Minutes, possibly longer. The fatal injuries may not have occurred immediately. Ruiz stared at the report. Lawson had been right again. Daniel had still been alive. Someone made another decision afterward. The emotional weight of that realization hit Daniel's family harder than any previous discovery. His sister Emily attended a private briefing. She carried one of Daniel's old photographs. She listened quietly, then asked one question. "Did he know?" Ruiz hesitated. "We believe he was conscious for at least part of what happened." Emily closed her eyes. 39 years of imagining had never prepared her for that answer. She later told reporters something simple. "My brother fought to come home." The town reacted differently than investigators expected. People began revisiting their own memory. A retired waitress remembered Daniel eating dinner alone that night. A gas station customer remembered seeing a white pickup nearby. A former deputy admitted something painful. "We were looking for the wrong story." Those words echoed across newspaper articles. The wrong story. That became the defining lesson of the investigation. Original detectives searched for a runaway. Modern detectives searched for hidden evidence. The evidence had been there all along, just misunderstood. Then another forgotten box changed hands. A retired county clerk discovered archived property tax files scheduled for disposal. She contacted investigators before shredding them. Inside was correspondence involving the ranch. One letter came from Vance, another from Hale. A third included a hand-drawn map. Ruiz spread the map across a conference table. It showed fence repairs, equipment locations, storage sheds, and one X. The X sat remarkably close to where Daniel's remains had been recovered. At first glance, it looked meaningless. Then investigators read the legend. Old equipment pit. Except no pit existed there anymore. Ground-penetrating radar returned. The excavation began. This time they found something metal, not another body. A rusted oil drum buried beneath compacted soil. Inside were burned papers, charred cloth, fragments of rope, and melted plastic. Laboratory testing confirmed traces of petroleum accelerants. Someone had tried to destroy evidence. The fire had not consumed everything. Microscopic fiber analysis connected material inside the drum to fibers recovered near Daniel's burial site. Investigators now believe the cleanup happened shortly after the murder. Evidence wasn't simply hidden, it was systematically erased. Yet every attempt left behind another microscopic mistake: a glass fragment, a fingerprint, a repair receipt, a burned fiber, a buried drum. Tiny failures. Together they built the truth. Late one evening, Ruiz remained alone in the evidence room. Boxes surrounded her. Old photographs covered the table. She noticed something nobody had discussed: Daniel's watch, recovered with his remains. The hands had stopped. 10:47. For decades, investigators estimated when Daniel disappeared. Now the broken watch offered another clue. Maybe it stopped during the assault, maybe later. Either way, it narrowed the window. She wrote the time across the whiteboard: 10:47 p.m. Then she looked back at Lawson's timeline. Everything aligned. The confrontation, the injury, the transport, the burial. 39 years had compressed into less than an hour. An entire life stolen before midnight. Outside, television crews continued broadcasting updates. Inside, investigators kept working, because one question still refused to disappear. If Vance and Hale orchestrated the cover-up, who helped afterward? Someone poured the concrete. Someone moved equipment. Someone stayed silent. The case was solved in many ways, but not completely. The remaining answers were hiding somewhere inside fading memories, forgotten records, and people who had carried fear for nearly 4 decades. And somewhere beyond those dusty files was another witness who had never realized that the truth they carried could finally break the silence that had haunted Texas since 1987. Texas 1987, cold case solved, 39-year-old secret shocks investigators. The file was no longer gathering dust. It was open on a desk beneath the harsh white lights of the sheriff's office, surrounded by photographs, financial records, witness statements, and forensic reports that had been ignored for almost 4 decades. But one question still remained. If Daniel Mercer had been alive after the attack, what happened to him during those final minutes? Investigators returned to Edward Lawson's statement. They played the interview again. Then again. Lawson had described Daniel lying on the ground beside the pickup. He remembered blood. He remembered Vance shouting. He remembered Hale telling him to get a shovel. But Lawson had also admitted something that made investigators He had left the ranch before Daniel's body was buried. He never saw the final moment. He only knew that Daniel was alive when he left. That meant Lawson's testimony could establish the confrontation. It could establish the presence of Vance and Hale. But it could not establish exactly how Daniel died. Investigators needed something physical, something that could survive the passage of 39 years. They returned to the remains. Forensic specialists carefully examined the bone. The injuries were old. The evidence was fragile. But one fracture stood out: a severe injury to the skull. The pattern was consistent with a heavy blunt force impact, the same kind of injury Lawson had described. Daniel had not died from an accident. He had been struck violently, and the injury was consistent with the account of the confrontation at the ranch. But investigators discovered something else. A small metallic fragment had been embedded near the damaged bone. It was heavily corroded. At first, nobody knew what it was. Then laboratory analysis identified the material. It was steel, a tool. Investigators searched photographs of Vance's equipment from 1987. One object appeared repeatedly: a short-handled mechanic's hammer. Its head had a distinctive shape. The same shape was consistent with the fragment recovered from Daniel's remains. The hammer itself was missing. But investigators found an old inventory sheet from Vance's workshop. One hammer was listed. Then, beside the entry, someone had written a single word: gone. The handwriting belonged to Vance. The evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to explain away, but there was still no direct confession, no video, no surviving weapon, no living suspect who could be placed at every stage of the crime. The investigators knew they were building a case from fragments that had survived time: a tire track, a receipt, a letter, a ledger, a witness, a piece of fabric, a blood stain, a buried body, and now a fragment of steel. Separately, each piece could be challenged. Together, they told a frighteningly consistent story. Daniel had discovered financial fraud. He confronted Vance. Hale became involved. The confrontation turned violent. Daniel was injured. His car was abandoned. His body was transported to the ranch. Then the evidence was concealed. But why had Lawson stayed silent for so long? Investigators asked him directly. His answer was simple: fear. He had been 23 years old. Vance controlled the jobs he depended on. Hale knew people throughout the county. Lawson said he believed that if he talked, he would disappear too. For years, he convinced himself that silence was survival. Then he grew old. People around him died. The ranch changed. The old truck disappeared. And the memory became heavier. He told investigators that every time he heard Daniel's name, he remembered the same image. A man lying on the ground, still breathing, still alive, still waiting for someone to help him. Lawson said that was the memory he could never escape. That testimony changed the emotional center of the case. This was no longer simply about a murder committed in 1987. It was about the people who saw something terrible and chose, or were forced, to remain silent. Investigators began searching for other witnesses. One name surfaced: Margaret Ellis. She had worked at a roadside diner near the highway. In 1987, she remembered seeing Daniel. She also remembered seeing Vance. The two men had been sitting at separate tables, but they were watching each other. Ellis said Daniel looked nervous. She remembered him checking the clock repeatedly. At one point, he approached Vance. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Then Daniel walked out. Vance followed several minutes later. Ellis had forgotten the incident until investigators showed her photographs. Then she remembered something else. Vance had a dark stain on his sleeve. She assumed it was grease. Now investigators wondered if it had been blood. The problem was obvious. 39 years had passed. A memory could change. Details could disappear. But Ellis remembered one thing with absolute confidence. Daniel had not looked like a man planning to disappear. He looked like a man expecting to return home. That mattered, because the original investigation had been built around the theory of voluntary disappearance. Now that theory was collapsing. Every witness who had once seemed insignificant became important. Every forgotten receipt became potentially valuable. Every old photograph was examined. Every date was compared. Investigators constructed a timeline covering Daniel's final 24 hours. The picture was becoming clearer. Daniel had worked that morning. He had spoken with co-workers. He had made a bank withdrawal. He had purchased nothing for a trip. He had not packed clothing. He had not contacted anyone about leaving. He had made plans for the following week. His sister remembered him promising to help repair something at her house. He never arrived. Those details were small, but together they destroyed the idea that Daniel had voluntarily disappeared. He had plans. He had responsibilities. He had reasons to come home. Someone interrupted those plans. Then investigators made another discovery: a telephone record. In 1987, phone systems were nothing like they are today, but long-distance calls were logged. The records were incomplete. Still, one call survived. At 9:18 p.m., Daniel called a number connected to Vance. The call lasted 47 seconds. No one knew what was said, but investigators now believed it was the final trigger. Daniel called Vance. Then he left. Less than an hour later, he was dead. The timing was chilling. Investigators examined Vance's phone records. At 9:26, Vance called Hale. The call lasted 3 minutes. Then, at 9:51, Hale called the ranch. The ranch had no regular telephone service. The number belonged to a neighboring property. Someone was coordinating. That realization changed the sequence. The meeting may not have been spontaneous. It may have been planned. Daniel believed he was going to confront one man. Instead, he may have walked into a trap involving two. The financial records gave them a motive. The telephone records gave them coordination. The witness testimony gave them presence. The forensic evidence gave them violence. And the ranch gave them the final location. Investigators still needed to understand how the cover-up worked. They studied the abandoned vehicle. Modern forensic processing found trace material inside the trunk. soil, plant fragments, fibers. None were individually conclusive, but the soil matched the geological composition of the ranch. The plant fragments matched vegetation growing near the old well. The fibers were consistent with the material found in Vance's truck. The car had been at the ranch. That was another critical connection. Daniel's vehicle had not simply been left on the roadside. It had been moved. The person responsible had returned to it after Daniel was gone. The scene had been staged, and someone had taken the time to make it look like Daniel had left voluntarily. Then investigators found the strangest detail of all: the driver's seat. It had been adjusted backward. Daniel was short. Vance was considerably taller. The position of the seat matched Vance's height. For decades, nobody had thought to measure it. Now investigators did. It fit. Not perfectly, but closely enough to support the theory that someone else had driven Daniel's car. That person had likely been Vance. The investigation was becoming a reconstruction of a crime that had been designed to leave almost nothing behind. But one thing had survived: human error. Someone forgot the tire tracks. Someone forgot the blood. Someone kept the ledger. Someone saved the letter. Someone remembered the truck. Someone buried Daniel beneath concrete. And someone, after 39 years, finally decided to speak. The case was now strong enough for prosecutors to issue a formal conclusion. Daniel Mercer had been murdered. Thomas Vance and Robert Hale were identified as the primary perpetrators. But because both men were dead, there would be no courtroom, no dramatic verdict, no jury, no final sentence. The punishment would never come in the way Daniel's family once imagined. Instead, the justice came through the truth. The family was finally told what happened. They were told where Daniel had been found. They were told how investigators believed he died, and they were shown the evidence. His sister reportedly sat silently for several minutes. Then she asked one question: was he alone? The investigator answered no. That was all she needed to hear. For 39 years, the family had imagined Daniel's final moments in countless ways. Now they knew he had not simply vanished into the darkness. Someone had been there. Someone had seen him. Someone had known what happened. And someone had carried that secret for nearly 4 decades. The Texas cold case had been solved. But solving it did not erase the year. It did not restore Daniel's life. It did not return the birthdays, the holidays, the conversations, the ordinary moments that should have happened. It only gave the family something they had been denied since 1987: certainty. And sometimes, after decades of uncertainty, certainty is the closest thing to peace a cold case can offer. Outside the sheriff's office, the world continued as normal. Cars moved through the streets. Businesses opened. People went to work. Nobody looking at the ordinary Texas landscape would have known how much history was buried beneath it. But investigators knew. They had walked through the old ranch. They had held the evidence. They had read the words written by frightened men decades earlier, and they had listened to a witness finally confront his own silence. 39 years had passed, but the case had never truly disappeared. It had only been waiting. Waiting inside a photograph. Waiting inside a ledger. Waiting beneath concrete. Waiting for someone to ask the right question. And when investigators finally did, the answer was devastating. Daniel Mercer never left Texas. He never started a new life. He never abandoned his family. He was taken from them. And the men who believed they had buried the truth discovered the one thing every investigator of a cold case eventually learned: time can destroy evidence. Time can silence witnesses. Time can erase memories. But time does not always erase the truth. Sometimes it only hides it. Until someone looks again. Texas, 1987. Cold case solved. 39-year-old secret shocks investigators. For Daniel Mercer's family, the case had finally been solved. For investigators, it was not over. There was still one question that refused to disappear. Who made the first move? Who decided Daniel had to die? The evidence had established the confrontation. It had established the ranch. It had established the concealment. But murder was rarely as simple as a collection of objects scattered across time. Someone had made a decision. Someone had crossed a line. and investigators wanted to know exactly when that happened. The answer began with a document recovered from the old accounting records. It was not a confession. It was not a threatening letter. It was a routine business form. A payment authorization dated 6 days before Daniel disappeared. The amount was $18,000. The recipient was a company that officially did not exist. Its address belonged to an empty office. Its telephone number had been disconnected years earlier. Daniel had apparently discovered the company. And beside the payment was a handwritten question. Who approved this? The handwriting was Daniel's. Investigators now believe that question was the beginning of the end. Daniel had started asking questions nobody wanted answered. He had discovered money disappearing from account. He had found forged signatures. He had found invoices for work that never happened. And he had traced the payments back to people he knew. Thomas Vance, Robert Hale, the men who had every reason to fear what Daniel might reveal. Investigators reconstructed the days before his disappearance. Daniel became increasingly cautious. He stopped discussing the financial records at work. He began keeping copies at home. He wrote names in a notebook. He marked dates. He recorded amounts. He was building his own evidence file. Then something changed. 2 pages disappeared from the notebook. The missing pages were not random. They came directly before the entry containing Vance's name. Investigators searched Daniel's former residence. The house had changed owners several times, but an attic storage area remained untouched. Inside an old cardboard box, they found carbon copies of several documents. One was a bank statement. Another was a handwritten calculation. The final page contained 3 columns: money received, money transferred, money missing. The missing amount totaled exactly $18,000. Daniel had been tracking the money, and he was close to proving it. The next question was obvious. Why did he withdraw that same amount? Investigators believe Daniel intended to force a confrontation. He may have planned to return the money. He may have wanted to prove that he knew where it had gone, or he may have been trying to protect himself. Whatever his intention, the withdrawal created panic. Vance knew Daniel had taken the money. Hale knew Daniel had records. And suddenly, Daniel became dangerous. The telephone records supported that theory. Daniel called Vance. Minutes later, Vance called Hale. Then the ranch number was contacted. The meeting was arranged. Daniel believed he was going to discuss money. He did not know he was walking toward an ambush. That possibility became stronger when investigators interviewed another witness. Her name was Linda Shaw. In 1987, she worked at a gas station. She remembered Daniel arriving shortly after 9. He bought coffee. He stood near the counter. Then he received a telephone call. Shaw remembered his expression changing. He looked worried. When he hung up, he asked what time the station closed. She told him midnight. Daniel nodded. Then he left. Shaw remembered one sentence: "I'll be back tomorrow." He never was. That detail devastated investigators. It confirmed something Daniel's family had said for years. He had expected to return. He had not planned to disappear. He had made ordinary plans for the next day. He believed he had a future. Someone took it from him. Investigators then revisited the roadside scene. The blood evidence had been processed. The tire tracks had been analyzed. The vehicle had been examined. But there was another detail: a small indentation on the passenger side door. It had been photographed in 1987, but never explained. Modern analysis suggested the door had been struck by another vehicle. A collision. Not severe, but enough to leave a mark. Investigators compared the height and location of the damage with Vance's pickup. The measurements were consistent. The pickup may have struck Daniel's car. That could explain the sudden confrontation. Perhaps Daniel stopped. Perhaps Vance approached. Perhaps the argument began beside the road. Then Daniel was forced into the pickup. The sequence remained uncertain, but the physical evidence supported a struggle, and the blood proved Daniel had been injured there. The abandoned car was not a mystery anymore. It was a crime scene. The investigators who had stood beside it in 1987 had been looking for a missing man. The investigators in 2026 were looking for a murderer. The difference was everything. The old evidence was processed again. Dusty photographs became digital images. Old documents became searchable. Handwriting became analyzable. DNA technology gave investigators information nobody could have imagined in 1987, and the case began to reveal details that had been invisible for decades. Then came the discovery that shocked the investigative team: a fingerprint. It had been lifted from the inside edge of Daniel's trunk. The print was incomplete, but the pattern was clear enough for comparison. The result came back. It belonged to Thomas Vance. Investigators stared at the report. Vance's fingerprints were not surprising. He had known Daniel. He had worked around his vehicle. There were legitimate reasons his prints might exist, but the location mattered. Inside the trunk, in an area where Daniel had no reason to need Vance's assistance. And when the fingerprint was compared with the reconstructed timeline, the implication became disturbing. Vance had likely opened the trunk after Daniel disappeared. Investigators searched for an explanation. They found one: the plastic sheeting, the rope, the tape. Those materials had been purchased by Vance. They had been found in Daniel's car. The trunk had Vance's fingerprint, and Daniel's body had been transported to the ranch. The pieces were aligning, but there was another problem. The fingerprint was old. Could investigators prove it was deposited on the night Daniel disappeared? No, they could not. It was evidence, not a timestamp. That distinction mattered. Prosecutors had to build the case around the totality of evidence. Then investigators found another witness, a truck driver named Carl Benson. In 1987, Benson had been driving through the area shortly after midnight. He remembered seeing two vehicles parked near the roadside. One was Daniel's car. The other was a white pickup. Benson remembered something else. The pickup's passenger door was open. A man stood beside it. Benson could not identify him, but he remembered the pickup, and he remembered the license plate. He had written the number down. Why? Because he thought the vehicle was blocking the road. That old note had survived in a personal notebook. Investigators checked the number. It belonged to Thomas Vance. Now the timeline became tighter. Daniel's car, Vance's truck, blood, tire tracks, the financial motive, the phone calls, the ranch, the buried remains, the fingerprint, the witness. The evidence no longer looked like coincidence. It looked like a chain, one link leading to another. Then investigators returned to the most important unanswered question: where was Robert Hale during the attack? The answer came from his own records, a hotel receipt. Hale had claimed he spent that night out of town, but the receipt showed something different. He checked into the hotel at 3:14 a.m., not at 8 p.m., as his original statement implied. That meant he could have been at the ranch, and investigators found a second document, a fuel purchase. Hale's vehicle had been refueled near the ranch shortly before midnight. The timing matched Lawson's testimony. Hale had lied, and investigators now understood why. He was not an innocent businessman caught in someone else's crime. He had been present. The evidence suggested both men were involved in the cover-up, but the final responsibility still belonged to the person who delivered the fatal blow. The forensic evidence pointed toward Vance: the hammer fragment, the injury pattern, the confrontation, the fingerprint, the truck, the witness statements. Everything kept circling back to him. Then investigators discovered one final document, a handwritten note from Vance. It had been found inside an old toolbox. The date was unknown, but the paper was clearly from the late 1980s. The note contained only one sentence: some things disappear if you bury them deep enough. Investigators could not prove it referred to Daniel. They could not prove when it was written. They could not prove why Vance wrote it. But placed beside the rest of the evidence, it was chilling. The man who had spent years insisting he knew nothing about Daniel had apparently written words about burying things, and Daniel had been buried on Vance's property. The cold case had become a story about a secret that had been carefully constructed. But no construction was perfect. There were cracks, the tire tracks, the receipt, the phone records, the financial trail, the fingerprint, the witness, the ledger, the remains. Every forgotten detail became another crack. Eventually, the truth came through. 39 years after Daniel Mercer disappeared, investigators could finally tell his family what had happened. They could not change the past. They could not put Vance or Hale in a courtroom, but they could put Daniel's name back where it belonged, among the solved cases, among the victims whose stories had finally been heard. And for the family, that distinction mattered, because for nearly 4 decades, Daniel had existed in a strange space between life and death, missing, unconfirmed, unknown. Now there was no question. He had been murdered. His body had been hidden. His disappearance had been staged, and the men responsible had carried the secret until death. But their deaths did not save the secret. The evidence survived them. The memories survived them. The documents survived them. And Daniel's family survived the years of uncertainty. That was the final irony. The men who believed time would protect them were defeated by time itself, because 39 years later, investigators had better tools, better technology, better databases. And one advantage the original investigators did not have: they knew Daniel had never chosen to disappear. They were finally asking the right question. Not where did he go, but who made him vanish? And the answer had been waiting in Texas all along. Texas, 1987. Cold case solved. 39-year-old secret shocks investigators. The evidence had finally formed a pattern, but investigators still had one problem. A pattern was not the same as certainty. For 39 years, Daniel Mercer's disappearance had been surrounded by theories. Some believed he ran away. Others suspected robbery. Some thought he had been killed by someone passing through town. Now the investigators knew better. Daniel had been murdered. His body had been hidden. His car had been staged. But the deeper they went, the more disturbing the case became, because the murder was not an isolated act. It appeared to have been followed by a deliberate campaign to erase Daniel from the story. The first sign was the missing paperwork. Daniel's employer had kept financial records for decades, but several files from 1987 were gone, not damaged, not misplaced, gone. Investigators asked the company what happened. The answer was simple. The files had been destroyed during an office renovation in the early 1990s, but one retired accountant remembered something different. She said the files had disappeared before the renovation. She remembered because Daniel had asked her to make copies. She had copied several invoices. Then someone told her to study. That person was Thomas Vance. The accountant had never reported it. She said she was frightened. She had a family. She had no idea what Vance was capable of. Now, nearly 4 decades later, she finally admitted what she had seen. Vance had entered the office late one evening. He searched Daniel's desk. He opened drawers. He took several papers. Then he asked where Daniel kept his copy. The accountant said she did not know. Vance left. 2 days later, Daniel disappeared. The timing was impossible to ignore. Investigators searched the accountant's personal file. She had kept one copy, a single invoice. The paper was yellowed. The ink was fading, but the numbers were still visible. The invoice showed a payment to one of the shell companies, and at the bottom was Daniel's handwritten notation. Fraud. That word changed the case. Daniel had known. He had understood what was happening, and he had been documenting it. The murder was no longer simply a confrontation over money. It was an attempt to prevent Daniel from exposing an entire operation. Investigators began tracing the shell company. Most had disappeared, but one had continued operating under a different name. The company was dissolved decades later. Its bank records were archived. Those records revealed transfers, thousands of dollars moving between accounts. Money eventually reached accounts controlled by Vance and Hale. The amounts were not enormous, but the pattern was unmistakable. Small payments, repeated transfers, false invoices, money moving through layers of paperwork. Daniel had found the system, and he had begun pulling it apart. Then investigators discovered something even more important. A transfer had occurred 3 days after Daniel disappeared. The amount was $18,000. The money Daniel had withdrawn was suddenly back in the account. Someone had returned it. Why? Investigators believed the answer was simple. The money had become evidence. Vance and Hale did not want it missing. They wanted the books to look normal. Daniel had removed the money. After he disappeared, someone replaced it. The transaction was the final piece of the financial motive. Daniel had threatened the entire scheme. Removing him solved the immediate problem, but the conspirators had made one mistake. They assumed nobody would look at the records again. 39 years later, someone did. The investigation then turned toward the final hours of Daniel's life. Investigators reconstructed his movements using old records. At 7:55 p.m., he was at home. At 8:14, he left. At 8:31, he stopped for fuel. At 9:02, he entered the diner. At 9:18, he called Van. At 9:47, he left the diner. At approximately 10:20, his car was seen on the rural road. At 10:31, a second vehicle appeared. Then nothing. No phone calls. No purchases. No witnesses. Silence. Investigators believe the attack occurred within that narrow window. They returned to Lawson. He remembered the time. He said the men arrived at the ranch shortly after 11. That fit. The distance between the roadside and ranch was less than 20 minutes. The rest of the timeline aligned. But Lawson had one more memory. He remembered Daniel saying something. 3 words. It's all recorded. Investigators stopped the interview. That sentence had enormous significance. Daniel may have believed he had evidence somewhere. Maybe documents. Maybe recordings. Maybe something else. If so, the conspirators may have spent years searching for it. Investigators searched Daniel's known possession, his home, his office, his car, his storage boxes. Nothing. Then they discovered an old Cosette tape. It was inside a box belonging to Daniel's sister. She had kept it for decades. She thought it contained music. The label was handwritten. No date. No description. Only the initials DM. Investigators digitized the tape. At first, there was static. Then a voice. Daniel's voice. The recording lasted less than 4 minutes. It was not a confession. It was not a conversation with Van. It was Daniel documenting what he knew. He mentioned the false invoices. He mentioned the missing money. He mentioned Vance. He mentioned Hale. And then he said something that investigators had never heard before. If anything happens to me, look at the ranch. The room went silent. For 39 years, investigators had searched for Daniel. Now Daniel had told them where to look. His family had unknowingly preserved the clue. The tape changed the investigation completely. It proved Daniel was afraid. It proved he suspected the people involved. And it explained why he had written, "I need to talk." He knew something was wrong. He knew someone was watching him. He may even have believed he was in danger, but he still went to the meeting. Why? Perhaps he thought he could confront Van. Perhaps he believed Hale would stay out of it. Perhaps he believed the truth would protect him. It did not. The tape also revealed another detail. Daniel said he had made copies of the financial records. He had hidden them. Investigators searched again. This time they searched the places Daniel had used before. The attic, the garage, the old office. Nothing. Then his sister remembered something. Daniel had once told her that if he ever needed to hide something important, he would put it somewhere nobody would bother looking. She assumed he meant the attic, but investigators interpreted the phrase differently. They searched the family property. Behind an old wall panel, they found a small metal box. Inside were documents, photographs, bank statements, and a handwritten list of names. The evidence was extraordinary. Daniel had preserved proof. He had known the danger. He had prepared for the possibility that something might happen, and he had left a trail. The documents connected Vance and Hale to the financial scheme. They showed payments, fake invoices, forged signatures, and one document was dated the day before Daniel disappeared. At the bottom, Daniel had written, "If they know I have this, I'm in trouble." Investigators finally understood. Daniel had not been careless. He had not been naive. He had anticipated danger. The people around him had simply been willing to go further than he expected. The case was now as close to complete as investigators could make it. But there was still one question. Why had the original detectives failed to uncover the truth? The answer was uncomfortable. They had followed the evidence available to them. The evidence had been incomplete. Technology was limited. The financial records were fragmented. Witnesses were afraid. The ranch was private property. And Daniel's disappearance was initially treated as voluntary. Once that theory took hold, everything was interpreted through it. His unlocked car became evidence that he had left willingly. His wallet became something he had forgotten. The lack of struggle became proof there had been no violence. The lack of a body became proof there was no murder. Every assumption pushed the investigation farther from the truth. The modern investigators did something different. They questioned every assumption. What if Daniel had not left voluntarily? What if the car was staged? What if the roadside was only part of the crime scene? What if the ranch mattered? What if the financial records were connected? What if the old witnesses remembered more than they believed? Those questions reopened the case, and eventually they reopened the truth. Daniel's family listened to the recovered record. His sister cried when she heard his voice, not because it solved the mystery, because for the first time in 39 years, she heard her brother again, alive, speaking, warning them. The recording ended with a short silence. Then Daniel said, "I just want this finished." He had no idea how long it would take. 39 years. A lifetime. Generations changed. People who had known him grew old. Some died. Buildings disappeared. Records were destroyed. The ranch changed. But Daniel's voice survived. And his final warning became the clue that finally broke the case open. Look at the ranch. Investigators did. And beneath that Texas soil, they found the truth. The men who believed the land would keep their secret were wrong. The concrete did not erase Daniel. The years did not erase him. The missing files did not erase him. The lies did not erase him. His voice remained. And once investigators heard it, there was no going back. The cold case had become something more than a forgotten murder. It became a warning that evidence can sleep for decades, a warning that memories can return, a warning that the smallest forgotten detail can destroy an entire lot. 39 years after Daniel Mercer disappeared, the silence was finally broken, and the first person to break it was Daniel himself. Texas 1987, cold case solved, 39-year-old secret shocks investigator. The recording changed the meaning of everything. Daniel Mercer had known he was in danger. He had known the money was missing. He had known the names involved. And most importantly, he had known that the ranch mattered. But there was one thing investigators still could not explain. Why did Daniel go there? If he believed Vance and Hale were dangerous, why would he agree to meet them? The answer may have been hidden in the final seconds of another recording. The investigators returned to the cassette. They cleaned the audio, removed background noise, separated the frequencies. Then they heard something buried beneath Daniel's voice. A second voice. Faint. Almost impossible to understand. But it was there. Someone had spoken after Daniel stopped recording. The audio technicians isolated the section. The voice appeared for less than 10 seconds. Investigators could not identify it with certainty. But one phrase was clear. "Bring the papers." The room went silent. Daniel had not been summoned to the ranch because of the money. He had been summoned because someone wanted the documents. The financial records. The proof. Daniel had the evidence they needed to destroy the scheme, and whoever called him knew it. That changed the motive. The murder may not have been planned simply to recover $18,000. The money was only part of the problem. The real threat was the evidence. Investigators returned to the metal box found behind the wall. They examined every document. Most were financial, but one photograph stood out. It showed a construction site. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Workers, equipment, a half-finished building. Then investigators noticed the background. A white pickup, Thomas Vance's truck, and beside it, Robert Hale. The photograph had been taken months before Daniel disappeared. That proved the two men were working together, but it revealed something more. The construction project had been one of the projects connected to the fraudulent invoices. Daniel had not accidentally discovered the fraud. He had been close to the people committing it. He had seen them. He had worked around them. He had learned how the system operated. and he had begun documenting it. Investigators enlarged the photograph. There was Daniel in the background. He was looking directly toward Van. The image captured a moment nobody had noticed for decades. Daniel had been watching them. The investigators began examining photographs chronologically. They found another, then another. Daniel appeared repeatedly near Vance and Hale. In one image, Daniel held a clipboard. In another, he was speaking with Hale. In a third, he was standing beside a stack of invoices. The relationship was obvious. Daniel was not an outsider. He was part of the operation until he realized what was happening. Then he became the threat. Investigators interviewed former employees. One man remembered Daniel confronting Hale in the office. He said Daniel had accused him of stealing. Hale became furious. He reportedly told Daniel to stop asking questions. The witness had forgotten the exact word, but he remembered the tone. He remembered Daniel looking frightened. He also remembered Vance entering the room. The argument ended quickly. Daniel left. 3 days later, he disappeared. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore, but investigators needed to know what happened between the office confrontation and the final meeting. They found the answer in a calendar. Daniel had kept a small desk calendar. Several dates were circled. One was marked with the initials TV, another with RH. The final date contained a single word, tonight. That was the night he disappeared. The calendar proved Daniel expected a meeting. It did not prove what happened there, but the evidence now suggested the meeting had been planned. Investigators reconstructed the final evening again. Daniel left home. He carried the documents. He made the call. He drove toward the meeting. Someone followed. The two vehicles met. Daniel was confronted. The argument escalated. Then the violence began. But investigators discovered something unusual about the blood evidence. There were two separate blood patterns, one near the driver's side, one near the rear of the vehicle. That suggested Daniel had been injured more than once. He may have been struck beside the car, then moved. The second impact may have occurred at the ranch. The investigators believed Daniel survived the first attack. That explained Lawson's statement. He was still breathing when Lawson left. The final blow likely came later. The hammer fragment supported that theory. The medical examiner concluded that Daniel's fatal injury occurred sometime after the initial assault. There was no way to establish the exact night, but the sequence was becoming clear. Daniel was attacked. He was transported. He was taken to the ranch. He was killed. Then his body was hidden. The people involved staged the disappearance, and they waited. They waited for the investigation to fade. It did, for decades. But the financial records created another problem for the killer. They could hide Daniel. They could move his car. They could destroy documents. But they could not erase every transaction. Investigators traced one payment to a bank account controlled by Hay. The payment had been made the week after Daniel disappeared. It was labeled as consulting income. There was no consulting work. The amount was $12,000. Investigators found another payment to Van, $8,000. Together, the payments totaled $20,000, nearly the amount missing from the original scheme. It appeared someone had been rewarded. The theory was chilling. Daniel had discovered the fraud. He was killed. Then the stolen money was distributed. The murder may have been part of a larger criminal arrangement, but there was still one missing piece. Who ordered the killing? Investigators could not prove that Vance had planned it. They could not prove Hale had ordered it. They could only establish that both were present and involved in the aftermath. Then Lawson remembered something else, something he had forgotten during the first interview. He said Hale had been carrying an envelope. After the argument, Hale opened it. Inside were several sheets of paper, Daniel's documents. Lawson said Hale looked at them. Then he told Vance. He brought everything. That sentence was devastating. It meant the meeting had been about the documents, not an accidental confrontation, not a spontaneous argument. They knew Daniel had them. They wanted them back, and they had prepared for the possibility that Daniel would resist. Investigators searched for the envelope. It was never found, but the recovered financial records matched Lawson's description. The documents Daniel carried were the same records later found in fragments. Someone had taken them. Someone had destroyed part of them. But Daniel had already hidden copies. That mistake would ultimately destroy the cover-up. The investigation then turned toward the family. Daniel's sister revealed that he had once told her something strange. He said, "If I ever disappear, don't believe the first story you hear." She had assumed he was joking. Now she understood. Daniel had sensed something coming. He had tried to leave instructions without frightening her. He had prepared for the possibility that the people he was investigating might come after him. The tragedy was that nobody understood his warning until it was too late. The case investigators had once considered a voluntary disappearance was now clearly a targeted kill, and the most haunting part was that Daniel had predicted it. His words had survived. His records had survived. His voice had survived. And eventually his body was found. The family held a memorial almost 40 years after he vanished. There was no mystery anymore. No missing person poster. No unanswered telephone. No endless speculation. Only a photograph, flowers, and a name. Daniel Mercer. The investigators who had solved the case attended. Some were young enough to have been born after Daniel disappeared. They stood beside people who had waited their entire adult lives for answers. The contrast was impossible to miss. 39 years separated the murder from the truth, but the emotion in that room belonged to the present. Daniel's sister spoke briefly. She did not talk about the suspect. She did not talk about the financial scheme. She talked about Daniel. The way he laughed. The way he helped people. The way he always believed problems could be solved if someone was willing to look closely enough. That belief had almost become the tragedy of his life. He had looked closely. He had found something dangerous, and he paid for it. But he also left behind enough evidence for someone else to finish what he started. The memorial ended as the sun was setting. Investigators remained outside. The Texas sky darkened. The road became quiet. And for the first time in 39 years, there was no question about where Daniel Mercer was. He was home. Not physically, not in the way his family had wanted, but his story had finally returned to the place where it belonged. The case file would now carry a different label. Solved. One word. 7 letters. After 39 years, that word meant everything. Yet the final mystery remained. Who else knew? Because investigators had uncovered evidence suggesting that the secret was larger than 2 men. There had been financial transactions. There had been forged documents. There had been people who helped move money. There had been people who knew about the ranch. And somewhere, perhaps, there was another person who had seen what happened that night. Someone who had never spoken. Someone who might still be alive. And if that person was listening to the news in 2026, they would now know something the killers never understood. The case was no longer buried. The evidence was out. The timeline was reconstructed. The family knew. The investigators knew. And a secret that had survived 39 years had finally become public. But sometimes, solving a murder creates another mystery. Not who died, not where, not when, but who else was there when the silence began. Texas, 1987, cold case solved, 39-year-old secret shocks investigator. The question of who else knew about Daniel Mercer became impossible to ignore. Investigators had reconstructed the murder. They had traced the money. They had found the hidden records. They had recovered Daniel's remains and connected the ranch to the final hours of his life. But the evidence suggested something larger. Someone had helped keep the secret alive. For 39 years, the truth had survived because too many people had chosen silence. Now investigators began looking at everyone connected to Thomas Vance and Robert Hale in 1987. Former employees, business associates, contractors, neighbors, friends, people who had worked at the ranch, people who had seen the trucks, people who had heard rumors. One name kept appearing: Frank Delaney. In 1987, Delaney had worked as a bookkeeper for one of the companies connected to Vance. He had handled invoices. He had prepared payment records. And he had known about the suspicious transfer. But when investigators first interviewed him in 1987, Delaney claimed he knew nothing about Daniel's disappearance. That statement had seemed believable until investigators found his signature. It appeared on several documents connected to the shell companies. Then they found his handwriting in the margin. Numbers, initials, payment dates. Delaney had known more than he admitted. But there was a problem. He had died in 2004. Again, the past had taken away the possibility of a courtroom confrontation. Investigators instead examined his personal records. His widow had kept boxes of old paperwork. One box contained tax documents. Another contained business files. The third was labeled simply 1987. Inside was a handwritten diary, not a detailed diary, just short entries, dates, appointments, names. And one entry stopped investigators cold. October 16th, Sill, 1987, the day after Daniel disappeared. The entry read, "Vance says it is handled." That was all. No explanation. No details. But the date was exact. Investigators compared it with the timeline. Daniel disappeared the night before. The next day, Vance told Delaney that it was handled. The phrase was ambiguous. It could have meant the financial problem. It could have meant the investigation. It could have meant something else entirely. But in the context of the evidence, it was chill. Then came another entry. 3 days later. Do not ask questions. Investigators stared at the word. The diary suggested fear. Delaney knew something. And he had been warned. The investigation expanded again. They examined Delaney's finances. A payment appeared 6 weeks after Daniel's disappearance. $5,000. The source was a company controlled by Hay. The payment had been labeled as consulting work. But Delaney had no record of performing any consulting. It looked like another piece of the puzzle. Money had moved after Daniel disappeared. People had been paid. Silence had a price. Then investigators found the most disturbing document. A typed list of names. There were 7 people on it. Vance, Hale, Delaney. For others, beside each name was a number. Not money, dates. Investigators compared the dates with known events. Each date corresponded to a person who had been connected to Daniel's investigation. One had worked at the construction company. Another had processed financial paperwork. A third had witnessed an argument. The fourth was a truck driver. Investigators realized the list might represent people who knew something. Someone had been keeping track. The question was, the document had no signature, but the typewriter markings matched a machine found in Vance's old office. It was another connection, another thread. And the more investigators pulled, the more complicated the case became. The murder itself had been hidden, but the cover-up had required people to move paperwork, people to move vehicles, people to remain silent, people to repeat the same story. And that was where the case became deeply disturbing. The original investigation had not simply failed because of one mistake. It had been overwhelmed by a carefully constructed false narrative. Daniel had disappeared. His car had been found. His belongings remained. There was no body. The people around him gave investigators plausible explanation. Maybe he ran away. Maybe he owed money. Maybe he was depressed. Maybe he wanted a new life. Every theory created another reason to stop searching. The truth was hidden behind ordinary explanation. That was what made the case so difficult. Nothing looked impossible. Everything looked merely uncertain. Until the evidence was viewed as a whole, investigators then revisited the original police report. One report contained an interview with Vance. He had been asked whether Daniel owed him money. Vance answered no. That statement was false. Bank records proved Vance owed Daniel $18,000. Another report asked whether Vance had been at the ranch that night. He said no. The truck records suggested otherwise. The witness placed his vehicle nearby. The phone records placed him in contact with Hay. The later evidence placed Daniel's remains on the property. Vance had lied repeatedly. The original detectives had no way to know. Modern investigators did. They placed every statement beside every piece of physical evidence. The contradictions became obvious. Then investigators examined Hale's original interview. His story was different. He claimed he had been out of town. The hotel receipt contradicted him. He claimed he did not know Daniel well. Photographs contradicted him. He claimed he had never visited the ranch. Property records contradicted him. He claimed he had no business relationship with Vance. Financial records contradicted him. The two men had spent years building separate stories, but the stories did not survive contact with the evidence. The investigators were now certain the cover-up had begun immediately after Daniel's disappearance. But who initiated it? Lawson believed Vance was the leader. Delaney's diary suggested Vance controlled the narrative. The financial records showed Hale benefited. The evidence pointed toward Vance as the central figure, but there was still one unanswered question. Why did Vance believe Daniel would meet him? Investigators discovered the answer in a letter Daniel had written to Vance the afternoon of his disappearance. The letter was never sent. It had remained inside Daniel's desk. The message was brief. I have copies. We need to settle this tonight. That sentence changed the timeline. Daniel had contacted Vance. He had told him he had copies. He had demanded a meeting. He believed the issue could still be resolved. Perhaps he thought money could be returned. Perhaps he thought Vance would confess. Perhaps he simply wanted the truth acknowledged. Instead, the meeting became fatal. The letter also explained why Daniel carried the documents. He was prepared. He wanted leverage. He believed evidence would protect him. It did not. The investigators now had a complete picture of Daniel's state of mind. He was afraid, but he was determined. He had discovered a crime. He had gathered evidence. He had confronted the people responsible, and he had walked into the meeting believing he could control the outcome. He could not. The violence that followed was sudden. The exact words exchanged would never be known. But Lawson remembered shouting. He remembered Daniel falling. He remembered Hale looking at Vance. Then silence. That silence lasted 39 years, until a forgotten diary, an old recording, and a box of financial documents finally broke it. The investigators released a statement. They announced that Daniel Mercer had been identified as the remains recovered from the ranch. They confirmed that the death was a homicide. They named Vance and Hale as the primary suspects responsible. The community reacted immediately. People who had lived there in 1987 remembered Daniel. Some remembered the posters. Some remembered the rumors. Some remembered the abandoned car. For decades they had believed Daniel might have simply vanished. Now they understood. He had been murdered. The reaction was not celebration. It was shock. Then anger. People asked how it had taken 39 years. Why had the ranch not been searched? Why had the financial records not been examined? Why had witnesses remained silent? Why had nobody connected the tire tracks to Vance? There were no easy answers. The original investigators had worked with limited technology. The witnesses had been afraid. Records disappeared. People died. The case became colder with every passing year. But Daniel's family refused to let the name disappear. They kept photographs. They kept letters. They kept his belongings. They kept waiting. And eventually, that persistence mattered, because when investigators reopened the case, the family still had evidence. The cassette, the documents, the memories, the small pieces of Daniel's life that had survived. That was the final lesson of the investigation. A cold case is not always dead. Sometimes it is simply incomplete. Sometimes the evidence is there. It is just waiting for someone to ask a different question. Daniel's case had been built around one assumption. He disappeared. The new investigation began with another. He was taken. That difference changed everything. The road became a crime scene. The ranch became a crime scene. The financial records became evident. The old witnesses became important. And the silence itself became suspicious. 39 years after Daniel vanished, the truth finally had nowhere left to hide. But investigators still had one final task. They had to determine whether anyone who was still alive had participated in the cover-up. And as they followed the money, one surviving name began to appear again and again. A name that had never appeared in the original investigation. A name that had been deliberately kept out of the story. A name that could reveal what happened after Daniel was buried. And when investigators finally located that person, they discovered something nobody expected. The secret had not died with Vance. Someone had been carrying it for 39 years, and that person was still alive.